This video is a fundraiser for New Alternatives, a local resource center that provides crisis and drop-in services for LGBTQ+ homeless youth in New York City. Please donate if you can.
Mommy, what's for supper?
Can't you see that I'm on the phone?
Hold it down, I just got home. Isn't it enough that I work all day?
At least you get a chance to get away. Dishes, diapers, dirty rags.
Bosses, bills, and nag.
Daddy!
Shut up, kids, you're in the way. I'm so mad I can slap your face.
Did I do something wrong?
Have you hugged your kid today? Did you send him on his way? With love, 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 love. She's a person just like you. She's got feelings too, so give her love, 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 love. If you hug him for a while, it'll leave you with a smile. He'll know it's love, 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 love.
This message is brought to you by this station and the Kentucky Department for Human Resources in the interest of our children. By the way,
Have you hugged your kid today?
We're all familiar with the popular slogan, "It takes a village to raise a child," but what happens when your village is toxic or when members of your family aren't interested in helping you raise your kids? What happens when your own parents who raised you take no interest in their own grandchildren? Well, what seems unthinkable is more common than you might believe. There's over 7,000 struggling parents on the Absent Grandparent subreddit, and it's a common complaint many millennial and Gen X parents as well as Gen Z parents born in the mid-90s like myself have today. They remember their grandparents helped raise them, and they expected their parents to do the same. But instead, they never visit, tell you to come to them, and when they do finally show up, they only do so to take photos of their grandkids to show off on Facebook, and are shocked that a 2-year-old won't sit still for more than a minute. You never did that. And this is anecdotal, but as someone who was raised in a multi-generational immigrant home with my grandmother, she was a huge part of my growing up. She drove me around as a toddler, picked me up from school as a kid, and would watch me while my mom was at work, etc. And the same goes for so many of my friends. Their grandparents were there every single day, watching over them, bathing them, feeding them, and just being present to lend a helping hand, being a witness to their existence and childhood. But now it seems like the older generations before us, namely baby boomers born between 1946 and 1964, who have raised Gen X, millennial, and even Gen Z kids like me, yes, I was raised by a boomer, they have seemingly stopped this long tradition of being present grandparents who want to be involved with not only their grandchildren's lives, but their children's lives. So what's going on here? Why is this? Is it just because boomers have become the most selfish generation in all of history? Has it just always been this way and we're romanticizing the past and the role of grandparents in our lives? Is talking about the generational divide and using generational language just further polarizing us from one another under late-stage capitalism? Is it because we've decided as adult children of abusive parents to stop taking the abuse as adults? Is it our own fault for estranging? Why are there so many no-support parents? In this video, I'll attempt to answer these questions and more, so without further ado, let's go. Why have our villages shrunk, and what can we do about it? Part 1. Have you hugged your kids today? So in 1975, Jack Lewis, a Kentucky state worker, created this infamous PSA to remind the boomer parents of his state, born in the mid-50s, to hug their Gen X kids. The average birthing age in Kentucky in 1970 was 20 years old. The national average in the U.S. for first-time mothers was 21 years old, meaning that these parents, namely the mothers, were very young, barely out of college if they even went to college. According to the 1970 U.S. Census Bureau, of all the students enrolled in college in 1970, 4.4 million or 59% were men, and 3 million or 41% were women. And because parents were so young back then, only in their early 20s, and raising children is very stressful, it does make sense as to why this PSA existed. Parenting is a skill you learn, it's not innate, and a lot of parenting is being able to control your own emotions rather than that of your child, but that's not how their parents parented them. These boomer parents were coming of age in the 1970s, 80s, and even 90s. If you're a late boomer parent who was born in 1963, you would have been 27 in 1990. And they were raised by the silent generation, a generation that was marked by scarcity and war, and many grew up with parents who barely gave them any physical affection. Back in the 1910s, doctors believed that if you hugged a baby when they cried, you were spoiling them. How is an infant to be managed that cries from temper, habit, or to be indulged? It should simply be allowed to cry it out. This often requires an hour, and in extreme cases 2 or 3 hours. A second struggle will seldom last more than 10 or 15 minutes, and a third will rarely be necessary, said Dr. Luther Emmett Holt, president of the American Association for the Study and Prevention of Infant Mortality. Holt also promoted reproduction control in society by means of eugenics. In his 1913 presidential address, he said, "We must eliminate the unfit by birth, not by death. The race is to be most effectively improved by preventing marriage and reproduction by the unfit, among whom we would class the diseased, the degenerate, the defective, and the criminal." So that's how the silent generation was raised. Cry it out and screw the kids that aren't useful to capitalism and can't work in factories 12 hours a day. And though a lot of silent generation parents went on to refute this advice as adults, and some even overindulged their boomer children, many continued this strict divide between child and parent. There was this underlying the child obeys the parent and the parent is always right mentality that they held, and that the kids of the 50s and early 60s would internalize as adults when raising their own children. Kids didn't even have rights in the US until 1881, when the US Federation of Labor passed a law that kids under 14 shouldn't have to work. In 1924, the US Congress failed to pass an amendment to the Constitution that would create a national child labor law for all states to follow. To this day, it still hasn't been ratified, leaving child labor up to the states. It wasn't until 1962 that the first child abuse cases were studied at a national level that included investigations by the Federal Department of Health and Education. Children in the US have very little rights and have only begun to be taken seriously fairly recently. But even then, they're discarded as soon as they make the connection that capitalism and climate change and war are all related. For centuries, children were just seen as mini adults who should be able to control their emotions just like grown-ups, and that they should be seen and not heard. Today, children are mainly just used as shields for the adults in the room to be bigots, what about the children, without actually listening to the children, specifically trans children. Additionally, becoming a parent wasn't much of a choice back in the early part of the 20th century, which led to a lot of pent-up resentment between parents and children, hence the reminder to hug your kid. I'd even say that until the 1980s, having children wasn't so much of a choice as it was an obligation and just seen as a natural part of growing up, especially for women. Many boomer kids, not all of them of course, but quite a few grew up being resented by their parents, who had them out of obligation. And then the boomers felt like they had to have kids too, because that's just how life works, right? And then they went on to raise their Gen X, Millennial, and Gen Z children. But in hindsight, I think many from the boomer generation of parents who had kids due to social pressures became disillusioned with the image of the perfect family very quickly. The facade fell. In my view, boomers were perhaps the first self-aware generation that realized that they weren't cut out for parenthood and that kids in marriage weren't making them happy, and that's because they were the first generation to even think about pursuing personal happiness and fulfillment instead of just surviving. Boomers were also the first consumerist class in that they had disposable income and abundance of products to buy via catalog, telephone. Mass production equaled mass consumption. Boomers made their possessions part of their identity. To buy stuff equals happiness. And children don't equal happiness. Maybe I could have just spent this money on myself. And this will echo later on in the video when we discuss how consumerist culture has evolved and taken over our lives so much that it has made children undesirable to so many people who may have the means to support children but don't, because I could just spend this money on me. And that view children as just objects that they have to spend money on and not a new part of their potential family, and see children as like human beings. Many of them might have realized it's not what they wanted or envisioned for their life, but instead of owning up to that and their mistakes, they decided to hold their elders up on pedestals, look back on the 50s and 60s with rose-colored glasses, and in turn resent the freedoms of the youth today and take their frustrations out on us because they weren't able to have our hindsight, as mostly self-aware millennials and Gen Z adults. Of course, not everyone who's younger is more self-aware, and not everyone who's older is closed-minded. I agree with Adam Conover in that speaking in generational terms divides us. However, here I think they're useful because there is a clear divide in how we parent and how we treat children. These views are based on how we were brought up. Boomers, specifically white middle-class boomers who as adults were able to accrue generational wealth, bought into the American dream but grew up in a time of civil unrest that exposed the cracks in society. In turn, they were introduced to other ways of being that could have led them to a freer future. But instead of having that reckoning, they turned their backs and said that their lives and elders were great and that we were the problem. Which is easy for them to say, as many white middle-class boomers went to college on one income, lived in a house their parents were able to own, and then inherited that house, and they were coming of age in a great post-war economy. Many of us will never be as rich as our parents. As Carlin said, they had sex, drugs, and rock and roll, and then they turned into conservative yuppies and took it all away. Now they're telling us, don't do drugs, don't have sex, stop getting avocado toast. It's easy to save up for a house if you just try. As if they didn't inherit their parents' houses during the housing boom. It's so hypocritical, but they'll never own up to it. A lot of boomers, in my opinion, are angry that they saw the world in front of them change as kids. They saw women's lib, birth control, women in the workforce, and that they could have had a different life. They see the growth of the child-free movement today and women living liberated lives, to some extent at least, and are angry at their past selves for not rebelling enough or not being conscious enough to say, no, I don't want to have a nuclear family, I don't want to get married, I don't want to have kids, etc. But it's hard to admit that your life didn't work out the way you wanted it to, that you're jealous of young people today, that you had children out of obligation or peer pressure, and that you regretted major life decisions. So instead, many older people, but not all, but many, become bitter at the youth and even their own children. Some people even have the opposite problem. Instead of not having present grandparents, they have their boomer parents begging them to give them grandkids and pressuring their kids into a life they do not want. In all, I think the generational thing plays a huge part in why the village has shrunk and why grandparents don't show up. They never wanted to be parents to begin with, and now that they have the freedom to finally do what they want, now that their kids have kids and have fled the nest, they want to be teenagers again. They're all over social media trying to take part in the latest trends, buying these new gadgets, etc. They might show up on holidays and birthdays to take photos with the kiddos to post on their Insta story, but that's about it. That's not to say that boomer grandparents are totally absent. I don't want to overgeneralize. There are so many awesome grandparents in their late 60s and 70s who make the time to help out, who make their homes their grandkids' second home, who offer to help, who you don't need to beg to watch the kids, and it's amazing to see. But I think the grandparents who do that wanted to be parents to begin with. They wanted to have kids. They like being caretakers. They love their own children. If your parents love you, they will love your grandkids equally. And unfortunately, the opposite is true. If your parents were abusive or mean or resented you as a kid, they will not show up. And that resentment, I think, is more common among older people who didn't grow up in a time where having children was much of a choice, where everyone was having kids, so it was weird if you didn't have a kid, even if you didn't like or want them. Parenting is really hard, especially parenting today, where we don't yell at kids, we don't hit them, we get down to their level and empathize with them. And again, it's about controlling our emotions more than theirs. And frankly, boomers don't want to do it. They don't want to do the work, and they sucked at it the first time, so honestly, who needs them? Part 2, estrangement and toxic villages. Is it our fault? Another reason for shrinking villages is because, frankly, many older parents who were raised in the 60s and 70s with PSAs about needing to hug your child are not great people to be around. Surprise, surprise. Like I just mentioned, they don't want to do the work to learn how to parent. They think parenting is just natural, that whatever the parent and adult says goes, and that the child's job is to sit down, shut up, and obey. Many times they don't respect their adult child's parenting styles of gentle parenting and empathy and patience, so they either cross a boundary and need to be put on a low contact list or get estranged from altogether. A lot of millennials like myself, I'm from 1995, grew up with boomer parents who were very unstable and emotionally immature. And as adults, we realize that we don't want people like that around our children. We are breaking cycles of abuse here. As a child of an abusive parent, having that adult be in our lives and our kids' life would only be triggering and harmful for everyone involved. I've been estranged from my mom for 3 years for the sake of myself and my child, and it has been the best 3 years of my life. And some angry estranged parents blame the lack of support or the lack of a village on their own kids. You're not letting me see them. You don't want my help. You cut me off and you have the audacity to complain about me? And it's like, what kind of help would you get from an abusive parent? How could you ever trust that person to watch your kid when you know how dangerous they are? And that goes not only for grandparents, but other family members who you might be able to depend on for childcare, but who might hit or snap at their own kids. I have in-laws who I wouldn't trust with my kids because I've seen their parenting style and I don't like it. It's sad that the village has shrunk because we're more aware of how kids should be treated and how they deserve to be treated, but I don't think it's such a big loss when you think about the negative impact these types of people could have on your child. We're done putting up with BS family members who are either bad parents or simply do not put in the work to get to know your kid or only use them for Instagram clout. Other generations might have swept that shit under the rug, but I'm not and you shouldn't either, even if it sadly means less help. Additionally, political polarization has led to estrangement and a reduction of the village. Many parents have gone low or no contact with family members who perhaps voted for Trump, who say homophobic and transphobic things, who are generally bigoted people who are too set in their ways to keep an open mind about how kids today are, specifically trans and non-binary kids as well as gay, lesbian, bi, and aro ace kids. Some family members who could have been involved and perhaps wanted to be involved are being shut down because they refuse to keep their ignorant, sexist, and racist beliefs to themselves. And sometimes it's the family member who cuts off the kid for how they identify. In so many cases, we hear about how it's the adult children who are the agitators and rocking the boat, but in many other cases, it's the parents or grandparents who aren't supportive of their grandkid, or even if their own child comes out as LGBTQ+. The rates among homeless trans youth are so high because parents and their extended family refuse to let them be who they are and accept them. I've also seen posts about how estrangement has stemmed from family members refusing to get vaccinated or even testing for COVID before they see their new grandchild. They want to see the baby, they want to be around their grandkids or grandnephews and nieces and cousins, but they're unwilling to accept their parents' boundary of simply needing to wear a mask to keep the children they say they love so much safe. I read a comment the other day that said COVID broke a lot of people, and yeah, that pretty much sums it up. We're living in a very politically contentious time right now where people don't want to be in community with their family if it means being around people who think that some people should have less rights or be killed because they're less than and undesirable, and it's survival of the fittest. That's not a benign opinion to have, nor one that we should entertain for the sake of family. And I'm glad so many parents, from what I've seen at least, are setting those boundaries with their relatives because it really is hard to go against the nuclear family. That unit is like the center of our lives and is seen as sacred, but in reality it's all arbitrary. There are no innately special bonds between parent or child. Just because someone birthed you or raised you doesn't mean you owe them anything. These labels of mom and dad are meaningless if there was no mutual respect that was fostered over someone's childhood. And I'm glad we're waking up to that fact. Part 3, the economy, shifting social norms, and the child-free movement. So in this section, we'll go deeper into some other reasons why I believe the village around children has decreased, such as the economy being in shambles, social norms changing, the child-free movement, and paid villages. So firstly, the economy. In some ways, it's not even that the village doesn't exist, it's that even when you have supportive family members and friends, they might live miles and miles away as parents need to follow the money, and many have moved away from their hometown or to their spouse's hometown or to a city hub, etc. for work and childcare. Though it should be noted that in 2022, nearly 6 in 10 young adults live within 10 miles of where they grew up, and 8 in 10 live within 100 miles according to a new study by researchers at the US Census Bureau and Harvard University. So grandparents, what's up? Recently on the Reddit page, someone posted about how their grandparents live 10 minutes away, but they've never seen their grandchild because they refuse to crate their dog, so there's that. But honestly, if you don't live within a decent driving distance from your parents or nearby close relatives, being within a 100-mile radius of your hometown doesn't mean much, especially considering how hard it is to visit family members with children, toddlers, and babies, and how hard it is for older people to drive and feel confident on busy roads and highways. Thank you, car culture. When people have to come to you for help, it makes it 10 times harder to depend on a village. Additionally, many older people still are working. 60-plus-year-olds cannot make it on Social Security alone. Many have no retirement plan or savings and sadly will be working until they keel over. According to ALI Retirement Income Institute, a nonprofit focused on retirement education, boomers who are white, male, or have college degrees are more likely to be financially prepared for retirement. But many older people of color, women, and those with only high school educations are lagging, the study found, not to mention unmarried single parents, specifically unmarried single mothers. A majority will find themselves with inadequate resources for retirement, and a large majority will either have inadequate resources or will likely suffer significant strains in retirement. Robert J. Shapiro, a co-author of the study and the chairman of economic consulting firm Soncon, told CBS Money Watch, "This isn't part of the American dream." The findings echo other research that has found more than 1 in 4 older workers are nearing retirement without a penny in savings, while many younger people have yet to start putting money away for their later years. It's more concerning for younger boomers approaching retirement age given that they only have a few years left to sock money away. About 53% of peak boomers, or the tail end of the generation, will turn 65 between 2024 and 2030, have less than $250,000 in assets, the new study found. But huge disparities exist within the group, the study found, based on its analysis of data from the Federal Reserve and the University of Michigan Health and Retirement Study, meaning white male boomers with higher higher education have it a lot easier in old age. Boomer-age grandparents can't afford to not work in order to take care of their grandchildren even when they want to. And that's to say nothing of the fact that the reason why many young people are living at home or are still in their hometown is because housing has become unaffordable. Young adults can't afford a home, let alone children. In 2023, the U.S. birth rate reached a historic low, with the general fertility rate dropping by 3% to 54.5 births per 1,000 women aged 15 to 44, and the number of births declining by 2% from 2022. Because the economy is so bad, even when a married couple with two incomes can afford to have a baby, they might not have financially stable parents to help out with a future grandchild. How are you supposed to have a village if even your parents can't retire? Like, when you think about it, realistically, who else beside your partner would be there if you had a baby? How close are you to your parents? Are they able to retire? How close are you with your siblings, to your friends? Would they come every weekend to check in on you postpartum? Would they sleep over to help you get some extra sleep during the newborn phase? In the end, what kind of help would I realistically have if I had a child is a question you should ask before having a child. And many responsible adults today are saying it's not in the cards. When you have a kid, those first 5 years are relentless. There's no prep time, no downtime. You leave the hospital with the newborn and it's like, good luck. And when you have no federal maternity leave and paternity leave program, no universal health care for the birthing parent or the baby, no federally funded child care, when your parents are still working and can't just be grandparents and retire, it makes the whole thing unfeasible. And this has led to children becoming a sign of financial privilege, which in today's economy it is. In the past in the US, when there was less access to birth control, sex education, and when we were less industrialized and a more agrarian society and a more patriarchal society, having a lot of children meant you were most likely impoverished and lived in a rural area. During the Industrial Revolution, this all changed. As poor families migrated to cities for better opportunities, having a smaller family size was advantageous and came about due to advancements in medicine and improved literacy rates, as well as upper-class white women being able to have more of a say in their lives. Factory work generally gave a sense of independence for women as a whole, but they were still making meager wages and were heavily exploited and at times killed on the job. But overall, factory workers earned greater wages compared to agricultural workers, but this often came at the expense of time and less than ideal working conditions. And it should be noted that for immigrant children and non-white children and women and immigrant women, they were continually exploited. Even after labor laws were passed, they went on unprotected. According to the Museum of Tolerance, by the late 1800s, over 1,000 laws regulating working conditions and limiting or forbidding child labor were passed. In many cases, the laws did not apply to immigrants. Therefore, they were often taken advantage of and wound up living in slums, working long hours for little pay. Opponents of the law argue that child labor was an unavoidable and even beneficial part of national economic growth and development. Sound familiar? Twice, reformers tried to pass an amendment to the U.S. Constitution to allow the federal government to regulate child labor, and twice these measures failed. Additionally, in the 20th century, almost 3/4 of all child laborers worked in agriculture. Many children were working on land that did not belong to their families. Living conditions were deplorable. Several workers would be crammed together in one shack. There was rarely running water. Children worked late into the evening, often without a meal break. These were specifically immigrant children that were not protected by the law because of their status, who were sent on orphan trains to the country in hopes to find work, as well as black children working as sharecroppers with their family on land that they were not able to own. So children during this era of industrialization were still being treated horribly and seen as a class of easily exploitable workers. But generally, industrialization and urbanization was one of the causes for the decreased number of children per household, not because kids were making more money or were treated with respect, but because more kids were reaching adulthood due to advancements in medicine and the advancements of women and children's rights. Additionally, because factory wages were higher than farmers, more and more parents were able to support their families through factory work, namely patriarchs, thus allowing more and more children to receive schooling and not have to work, resulting in more conscientious family planning. For example, eventually households didn't need everyone working, just the adults, so you need to push out less kids to support your family, especially as life expectancy and wage increases for adults, specifically adult males, white adult males, grew. There wasn't an overnight transition from 6 kids per family in 1830 to 3 kids in 1910. It took almost a century to get the infant mortality rate down, thanks to modern medicine and children's rights activists, as well as better economic circumstances for the lower classes and women. After industrialization and the civil rights movement and women's lib, and in a post-war economy that led to upward class mobility for millions of white people, the middle class emerged, and generally families were able to choose how many kids they wanted, and having a manageable amount of kids that would reach adulthood and go to college became an attainable middle class thing to do. The nuclear family of the baby boom consisted of 2 children, and the average birth rate was 3 kids per family in 1960. But it should be noted that having too many kids during this time and up until recently is still associated with being poor, as seen in Idiocracy that suggests stupid people have stupid kids because intelligence is linked to genetics and class, and that these stupid people procreate too much. That's why we elected Bush. Like, okay, lib. Fast forward to today, where we have what's trashy if you're poor but classy if you're rich, having a lot of kids. Today, having a lot of kids, or any kids, is a sign of wealth and conspicuous consumption, which in a way it has been since childhood and adolescence was commodified and mass-produced. Kids in the modern era have always been a bit of a status symbol for their parents, but in an age where the middle class is struggling to start families, where once that was just a rite of passage for their parents, children's statuses as signifiers of wealth has skyrocketed. Having kids now in today's economy and today's society, which still doesn't look very fondly on children, hence the absent grandparent thing, means you have the financial conditions to care for one. Not in all cases, of course, but for most people today, having kids is a conscious choice rather than just a fact of life. Especially with the shrinking village phenomenon, having children a lot of the time, but not all the time, means you have a support network and are privileged in that, whether it's paid help, such as a nanny or daycare or reliable sitters, or a loving family, which is not the norm for many of us. It might mean you have financial stability that so many people in this country are lacking. Of course, not in all cases, but being financially ready to have a child is something that most parents at least think about before they decide to expand their family, and sadly for many in the shrinking middle class, that's just a pipe dream. Again, we will never be as rich as our parents, and therefore many people just won't become parents. The last big reason as to why parents' villages today have decreased in size is because of the child-free movement and hyper-individuality under capitalism. In that, it's not even that people are dealing with their own shit, like they can't come over to check in on you and your kid because of work, for example. It's that they just don't want to be around kids and people with kids, even if they're your friend or family member. It makes me think of that viral tweet of like, do you pick your friend up from the airport? Like, what kind of society have we turned into that you wouldn't pick a friend up from the airport if you were able to do so? Isn't that just a nice thing to do? The world has become so transactional that no one wants to do something just to be nice. It seems to me as if most people will only do something nice if they get something in return. Like, sorry kids and your friends with kids don't give you a gold star for hanging out with them, or that you don't get a gold star for picking your friend up from the airport. The child-free movement has made it socially acceptable to be like, I don't want to have kids, which is a huge step forward because for the longest time, people who had a disdain for children had children just because it was the normal thing to do. And I cannot stress this enough, if you don't like children, please don't have them. I'm glad that people are having less kids because kids should always come into this world wanted and loved. However, there's a fine line between knowing kids just aren't for you to actively cutting off friends who have children and not wanting to support your relatives postpartum and be a part of their village because you think kids are annoying and call them crotch goblins. And I do want to say here that I think these people are in the minority of the child-free movement, and that's not what the child-free movement means. But I can't help but roll my eyes when I scroll through the child-free subreddit and see posts complaining about parents talking about how they don't have a village, declaring it takes a village to raise a child, well, unfortunately your family is not a free childcare village. And I think this post speaks to a gross misunderstanding of what the village is on both sides. For some child-free people, they have this impression that parents want to dump their kids off with them at any chance they get and act as if they're entitled to a village because they're family, even when they don't want to babysit, don't feel comfortable around children, etc. And likewise, there are some parents out there that look for any excuse to dump their kids off with someone else who outwardly complain about taking care of them and see the village as any breathing adult within a 5-minute radius. And I've seen some wild things on the parenting subreddit written by parents who encounter negligent parents, like parents who let their kid wander off into a neighbor's yard to get some free babysitting in, or who purposely drop their kid off at a neighbor's doorstep and then speed away. Like, that's fucked up. The village is not a dumping ground for kids, nor is it for your relatives to make your kid the center of of their whole world and do more parenting than the actual parents. The point of the village to me is to have people witness you and your child's existence. To have witnesses to our existence is the point of the village. To witness us as parents, to witness the child, to give some recognition to the hard work we're doing as parents and to the kids that need to know they're not alone and that other people care about them. That's all we really want in life, isn't it, as humans? Is for people to see us, to recognize us. And it's so important for children to have that validation, that they have trusted adults in their life aside from their parents that love and care about them. There's been this gross misunderstanding between parents and child-free adults about what the village is, and I hope I've cleared it up a little bit. And if you are child-free and don't want children of your own, but know someone in your life who has a kid, and you're okay with being around them and still want to be in your friends or relatives' life as they go through this journey of parenting, be there for them and their kid. It'll mean so much to both of them if you want to be a willing participant in that community. If you don't, that's fine, but please try not to complain about parents talking about the lack of a village, especially if you are actively making someone's already small village even smaller. One hard pill I've had to swallow is that some people just aren't interested in your kid, no matter if they're family, friends, neighbors, whatever. Your kid is your kid. They're special and amazing to you, but not really to anyone else, and that's okay too. You can't force people to care about your kid or to take care of them. If they want to be there, they'll be there, and if they don't want to show up, that's on them. And sadly, that includes close relatives who you'd think would care about a new addition to the family, but actually don't care. And I think that says more about them than anything else. When it comes to watching the kids, specifically kids under 6 who aren't eligible for public school, it is nice to have a village of family and friends to help take off some of the burden. People who like to be around children and know how to care for them are invaluable. But a lot of people have no idea how to interact with children, even parents who have raised their own. And it is a lot harder now as parents who live in a world where adult family members and friends who could have been part of your child's life want their child-free spaces and lives, distance themselves when a family member or friend becomes a parent, which again is fine, but makes it harder to find willing and competent childcare, as well as just companions to go through life with. And generally, at least for me, the decreasing birth rate due to economic factors and this newfound freedom away from the nuclear family has led to a smaller village in that there's just less women among us, or at least among me, giving birth. All of my friends and family members my age are childless. They don't want to have kids, and that's fine. It's their life, and I'm glad that they have these choices. But it has made parenting feel more lonely. It's not like the 1970s where there was a built-in village of other women your age also giving birth, where becoming a parent was more of a shared experience. But I don't think this is a bad thing because many moms in the 1970s had children out of social obligation and lack of education, whereas today many women who give birth do it willingly rather than because everyone else is doing it. Parenting should be an intentional and educated choice, not something you do on a whim. And though for me it feels like no one is having kids in my circle, to them it probably feels like the opposite, that everyone's having kids. It's just a matter of perspective. Overall, I wish it was easier for people to have kids who wanted them. And it should be remembered that capitalism and corporate greed has taken that away, not women's right to choose. The rich that just keep getting richer has shrunk the middle class so much that even the nuclear family, a staple of the US, has become financially gatekept. I think there are so many people who do want to have a family, but it's just so hard right now to do so in a nation where the government is so hostile to mothers and children. Rather than making parenthood feel accessible, it feels dangerous, and that's sad to me. Part 4. Is this a rich white person problem? Some may say that this lack of a village is a rich white person problem rather than an economic problem, because for lower class parents and for many parents of immigrant backgrounds and other minority communities, they've historically had a close-knit village. They've had to build a community and rely on one another to survive adversity and oppression in the US. They've needed community, whereas white privileged Americans who have been able to reap financial rewards of capitalism for decades don't. Immigrant parents have a higher incentive to show up for their kids and grandkids as they're putting roots down in this new country. Low-income families can't afford to just cut someone off even if they're abusive. We have to survive, and if that means being in a community with people who have done you harm, then that's sometimes how it is. But these groups are not a monolith. There are immigrant families and low-income families who don't show up for their grandkids or relatives or even their own children because they simply don't want to. And in fact, the most vulnerable people without a village are low-income families and parents who leave abusive situations situations only to find themselves financially stuck and then have to go back to the abuse because that's their lifeline, and that's terrifying. In fact, in many of these communities, cutting off an abusive family member is an extreme taboo because the community and family is put on such a high pedestal. Even talking about something a family member might have done to you is something many older people, including your own parents, don't want to hear. Don't rock the boat. What are you doing? You have to put your own shit aside for the well-being of the collective, and that's really hard to do when the community is unwilling to acknowledge the hurt that one of their members have caused. On the other hand, it's natural to want to protect one of your own despite them being harmful. The US is so hostile to minorities, you don't want to give the rich white people the satisfaction of being right about someone in your community. And in the end, though these minority communities, be them immigrants, racial minorities, religious minorities, lower income people, etc., might have close villages, have people involved in their child's life and in their own lives, they're more complicated and nuanced than just everything's good here, sucks to be you. The lack of a village is something that affects all classes and races, but of course the effects are worse if you're a low-income minority in an abusive family situation that you can't afford to leave. In a situation where you can't afford daycare, you can't afford to take time off work, you need to be financially independent, but at the same time, you have to leave your child with your less than stellar mom because you have no one else. That's the sad reality for many parents and their children. Not only because we don't have free daycare or universal health care, but also because many parents do not want to change for the better for their children or grandchildren, and that problem impacts all classes. But again, less so for white wealthy families who can afford paid help and a paid village like daycare, nannies, babysitters, etc. for those first 6 years of life before school starts. And then there's the white wealthy parents, namely patriarchs, who think that even having paid help is a cop-out even though they can afford it. I think a lot about how the Ballerina Farms mom doesn't even have childcare because her husband says she should be able to do it all by herself. I think that this problem of no village for these types of wealthy families stems from white Protestant US individualism and patriarchy, in that we don't want some sort of nanny state. We want to be independent, raise our families alone, no handouts, it's us against the world. It's just mom and sometimes the dad on a homestead. We don't need a village. We can create our own with 8 or more children like God intended, have kids raising kids. And sadly, this type of rugged individualistic life where it's like fuck yours got mine has been put through an Instagram filter and romanticized for millions of young women around the world. And though I can see the appeal in farm life, I also don't think we should overlook the colonial and racist implications of homesteading. Not to mention, why do these large properties need to be occupied by just one family? Why not create a farm collective? Oh, it's to keep wealth concentrated between whites only? Okay, now it makes more sense. Of course, it's mostly the men who tout all this nonsense about returning to our roots because they're not the ones home with the babies, toddlers, and young children all day who also have to cook, clean, give birth, and somehow stay financially independent in case of a divorce. So add patriarchy to the list of why villages don't exist for mothers anymore. Lastly, in white wealthy circles, villages are less common because of this mindset capitalism puts us in, that works to dehumanize other people and see them only as competition, to see life itself as a competition. The rich treat each other as rivals rather than as fellow human beings. And that sort of mindset trickles down to the rest of the classes, where we have to beat each other down to get ahead without lending a helping hand to those at the bottom. Parents withhold information from one another to get a head start and share parenting stories only to one-up one another in a constant battle for resources. Who goes to the best daycare? Who has the cutest clothes? Who went to the fanciest hospital? Who had an unmedicated birth and who had an elective C-section? Who breastfed? Who walked first? And this creates such a hostile environment to raise children in, and it's in turn made people not want to be in any sort of village because of, again, fuck yours got mine. I won't tell you I have a paid village helping me so you think I'm some sort of super mom. I won't give you the number of my reliable babysitter. I won't tell you where the best schools are or where the best pediatricians work or where my daughter got her dress. And some may say this lack of a village is just a US phenomenon. In some ways, I do think that's true-ish. In Brazil, where I live, for example, the child-free movement hasn't really become a thing yet, as far as I've seen. Young people across all social classes are still having kids, and it's easier to find people to share that experience with. But many are having fewer kids, as the birth rate is on the decline, but again for positive reasons like birth control, sex education, more children living to adulthood, etc. Also, the child and family culture is a lot different in Brazil than it is in the US, and that's largely due to Catholicism. I'd also say that kids are more welcome in society as a whole. Lots of restaurants and stores and malls have play places for kids so the parents can eat and shop. There's also federally paid maternity leave that lasts 6 months, and with public daycare starting at 6 months. Not to mention, we have universal health care, meaning you don't need to pay to give birth, for vaccinations, for post and prenatal care, and kids can see a pediatrician for free. We celebrate Children's Day in October, which I didn't even know existed until I moved here. Conversely, however, I think many people do still have kids out of social obligation, not only in Brazil but throughout the world, but especially in Brazil, where having a child is just the normal thing to do. I also think that because kids are so welcome everywhere, it leads to potential dangerous things happening. Like, it's very common to see newborn babies at bars or adult spaces because that's just how things are. And though I guess that's nice to some people, I don't like seeing newborns or infants at places with inebriated adults who are out to enjoy themselves and parenting isn't their number one priority at that moment. But I will note, this is not just a Brazilian thing. I've seen it in the US too, where parents don't want to slow down their life for their children. And as someone from the US, you might think, well, just hire a babysitter, but babysitting is not a thing here, at least from what I've seen. Part-time jobs or hourly wage jobs in Brazil don't really exist. If you have hired help for your kids, they are a full-time employee with benefits because that's how the working law is. And if you do have a babysitter, they're most likely your family member. Families and friends a lot of the time go out together and bring everyone, even babies. And if you're at a bar with your baby, your mother might watch them if she goes with you, or if you're rich, you have your nanny who might go with you. But most people do not leave their babies at home when it's time to go out and have fun, especially if they're breastfeeding. But that's during free time. When it comes to the work week and the village, I will say I've seen plenty of cases where the mom works full time and even travels, and the grandparents stay home to raise the children until they can go to daycare, which is around 2 years old. And these grandparents, namely the maternal grandmother, are on standby if the child is sick from school, when the mother is working full time during the week, etc. The work week in Brazil is 44 hours. So yeah, if you have a maternal grandmother in your life who isn't working, who is still married, as a lot of the time in Brazil and in the US, grandparents don't help out because they're divorced and less financially stable or don't want to see an ex-spouse or are dating, etc. It's amazing to have a maternal grandma in your life that isn't toxic. It's like how I was raised when my mom was working full time and my grandmother would stay home with us until I started school. So these are the positives, but I also don't want to overgeneralize. Everyone's life is different. There are plenty of moms in Brazil who don't have villages and because of that can't work, or they have a lot of family that could help, but they all need to work, so it leaves the mom in a precarious financial position. It's more complicated than an either-or situation. I will also say some negative aspects about parenting in Brazil I've come across is that hitting as a punishment for kids is still very common and laughed at as a coping mechanism, and seen as a cultural norm rather than for what it is, abuse. You don't hit your kid, that's not okay. There's still a heavy emphasis on you are the child and I'm the parent and therefore I'm always right and you're wrong, which I really can't stand if I'm being honest. It's not in every household, but it is a social norm. Additionally, family culture in Brazil is put on a pedestal. You do not go against the family. We don't talk about abusive family members. We don't cut anyone off. It is what it is. And in some respect, I do understand this because who else will always be there for you, hypothetically, even if you're on the brink of death? Family will be there. But in reality and in practice, just because someone is in your family and will be there when you're dying doesn't mean they actually care about you or respect you or treat you well. And this goes across all cultures and societies. Yes, they might be there for you in theory and when it's convenient for them, but if they actually love you is another story. That doesn't mean that you should just cut anyone off who you might disagree with, nor does it mean sweeping disrespect and abuse under the rug. Family, whether it be the family that raises you, your biological family, or found family, is a crucial part of society that I think we just need to work on and reevaluate and protect people's mental health and get people help in order to maintain those bonds that are so important. But so many people are unwilling to do that work. There needs to be a happy medium, but it's not easy to reach, especially in cultures that are unquestioning when it comes to fealty to the family no matter what. And that goes again for families everywhere. Generally though, I do think Brazil is more welcoming when it comes to having a child, like with healthcare and daycare and maternity leave and spaces for kids in malls and beaches. Like some restaurants at the beach have cribs and hammocks to let babies sleep while the parents eat and rest and chill, etc. However, the village is another thing. Like in the US, you could have a paid village, you could have grandparents helping out, you could have nothing. And of course, the richer you are, the more help you can hire. Whereas if you're of a lower class status, you might not be able to work for years if you don't have family helping out. which again leads to family needing to be closer to survive, but also could lead to more abusive situations because mothers may not have any financial security to leave dangerous situations. When it comes to South Korea, the country with the lowest birth rate in the world, I was recently reading an article from The New Yorker entitled The End of Children by Gideon Lewis Krauss, and it was an interesting read about why people are having less children. He argues that children are being reduced to mere numbers that don't add up in a hyper-consumerist and hyper-individualistic world. In South Korea, even with government financial incentives and long maternity and paternity leaves and childcare, people are choosing themselves first. He writes, "For most of human history, having children was something the majority of people simply did without thinking too much about it. Now it's one competing alternative among many. The only overarching explanation for the global fertility decline is that once childbearing is no longer seen as something special, as an obligation to God, to one's ancestors, or to the future, people will do less of it. It is misogynistic to equate reproductive autonomy with self-indulgence, and child-free people often devote themselves to loving, conscientious caretaking. At the same time, we should be able to acknowledge that there is something slightly discomforting about a world that weighs children against expensive dinners or vacations to Venice as matters of mere preference in a logic of consumption." Like he writes, weighing the options of having a child versus a child-free life isn't a bad thing, nor do I think is the foremost reason as to why people aren't having kids. How many people can afford a trip to Venice even without kids? But I do agree that it is troubling to see kids viewed in this manner, as just objects or experiences, and not like a lifelong family member that you'll be able to nourish and raise and get to love forever. Like we talked about in part 1, hyper-consumerist culture has turned children into just more stuff you spend money on. And because the economy has gotten so bad, you can't have it all like you might have had in the 1950s, at least in the US, where you could buy stuff for yourself and your kids and send them to college on one income. Nowadays, you can have it all, but you never really could, and that's okay. That's part of parenting. Parenting is a lifelong journey of self-sacrifice, and more people don't want to do that, and I think that's okay. And South Korea is in the unique position of having a strong economy and with a population who has money to support children, but unlike our boomer grandparents, have the hindsight to be like, the nuclear family just isn't for me. I'm going to spend my disposable income and very little free time on myself. And honestly, as long as we turn away from infinite production and an economy that depends on infinite consumption and a new populace of buyers, we can all survive and be happy. We'll be okay. Lewis Krauss continues, "There's a philosophical view, best associated with the scholar L.A. Paul, that the decision to have children is fundamentally irrational. A rigorous cost-benefit analysis might produce an estimate of a child's expected value, but the experience is transformative in a way that renders the calculation irrelevant. You will have made a decision by the lights of a person you will no longer be. Child rearing is not a necessary condition for vulnerability. It's not even a sufficient one. But there may nevertheless be something irreducible about the shared experience of parenthood, a life in which your fragile heart now seems to beat on the outside of your body. You see the guardians of a sleeping child on the subway and think, these are not just two random strangers, but fellow passengers with utterly exasperating human beings for whom they would unequivocally die. And I agree that seeing kids and babies as just like life ruiners and draining your wallet is horrible and contributes to an anti-child sentiment, which has led to the birth rate decline in South Korea. Especially in a society that dehumanizes you, you start to see people just as numbers, even children." The author also mentions how child-free spaces have grown in the past decade in the country as an example of anti-child sentiment. He writes how when one couple brought their baby home from the hospital, the first thing they did was apologize to their neighbors, warning them that they might move around and make noise. Fortunately, the elderly couple downstairs was more forgiving than most. Miji and Ho-gil were very happy. It was easy to imagine having a second child, which they did. However, the author goes on to note, their lives are largely isolated. They're grateful for the region's rural beauty, but the closest pediatrician is about 20 minutes away. Miji said, if your baby isn't healthy, you can't live here. The father in this pairing in particular is very unconventional for South Korean standards, even saying that his kids don't have to go to college. And so, his unmarried male friends have asked him, aren't you bored of being a father? And this attitude of seeing kids as mere commodities, or what will this thing do for me, is very concerning. Part of having a kid is pure sacrifice. It's years and years of grueling work. You basically become a daycare teacher for 5 years, and then you will never not worry about this being you helped raise. You won't go out to parties. You won't be able to do whatever you want whenever you want for years. Kids will change your life, period. And it's shitty that we as adults expect something in return from that other than your child's trust, love, and respect. Like, what do you want, a gold star for being a parent? At the same time, though I can get on board with some of the author's arguments, I don't think that this type of selfish attitude is the principal reason why adults aren't having kids. I do still think it comes down to capitalism and the need for infinite growth and the dehumanization of laborers and the alienation of labor. We need to change the economic model our lives are run by in order to see each other again and in order to want to bring kids into this world again. Also, I have questions. This whole article made me wonder, where are the villages of South Koreans? Where are the paid villages, nannies or grandparents? He doesn't talk about that at all. Do these people have help available to them? Is it seen as a taboo if you hire a nanny? This is a big piece of the puzzle as to why people don't have children. They can't swing it without either paid help or familial help. For the upper echelons of Korean society, I'm sure they have paid help. Like in Brazil and the US, so many parents can go on that trip to Venice and Europe and go out to fancy restaurants and still have children. The selfish thing kind of falls apart once you start to question it more. Oh, social media makes us more self-centered. We just care about the gram, and that's why we don't have children. Though is a small contributing factor, plenty of rich, selfish people who only view their kids as mini-me's also have nannies in order to have children and keep up their luxurious lifestyle. And personally, I think that's a reason why people are having less kids overall, or are questioning having kids at least. They want to be able to have the same lifestyle they have now and not make that sacrifice, and because only a few people can afford paid help, less adults are having kids. For the middle and lower class would-be parents, maybe their parents are sick and old and couldn't help them out even if they were to have children. So that's why they gave up on the idea. He doesn't delve into the grandparent question, which I think is a huge missing piece of his research. I think what really makes people not want to have children is not having a supportive community and family. And though that is spurred on by selfishness and self-centeredness, those attitudes are bred under capitalism and not just FOMO and Instagram and young people. I'm extremely wary to entertain this idea put forth by mainly white male cultural critics that this generation of South Koreans are just too selfish to have children, when it's much more complicated than that. And sure, it is a factor. Aini made a video about how South Korean culture is so competitive, people are going into debt over luxury purses. But again, it's not the only factor. Little was said in the article about conservatism and the patriarchy, other big reasons why adults, mainly women, don't want to have children in South Korea. And even with daycare and time off from work culture in South Korea is very demanding, where people are encouraged to work 52 hours a week. And if you choose to leave your company to have a child, even with workplace protections, it's still frowned upon. Not to mention super slim patriarchal beauty ideals that are threatened when one becomes pregnant, and the need to bounce back and conform to the heteronormative ideals of femininity is really hard. It's not just that they can't get their perfect Instagram photo at the latest cafe. And if the population decreases in size, why is that a cause for alarm when simultaneously people are saying that there's too many people? It's because, again, of the infinite growth needed by a capitalist economy. I made a video about this underpopulation conspiracy that you can watch here. Overall, I don't think that selfishness alone will cause an epidemic of no children, but rather a culture of dehumanization under late-stage capitalism and embracing hyper-individuality and seeing kids as numbers on a spreadsheet. We want this idyllic village where people rally around us, but where we don't need to put in the work to care about other people, and that's not right. The only way we're going to have a village again or any sense of community is to disregard this capitalist way of thinking, this elitist way of thinking that has been shoved down our throats by the upper classes. We need to care about our neighbors no matter who they are, and simply be nice to people and respect each other's boundaries. We need to educate adults on how to raise little humans and to teach everyone to respect children. But this goes directly against white supremacist patriarchal capitalism and conservative Christian dogma, and that's why it's been so hard to undo. Today, even a lot of white people for the first time are feeling the lack of a village because for so long they haven't needed one. They were able to have the paid village. But with today's economy being how it is, with two parents needing to work, with daycare being so expensive, and realizing that their parents will not be involved in child rearing, they do need a village, but don't know how to form one because unlike their lower income and minority peers, they've just never thought about it before. There are mom meetup apps now to help you get in touch with other moms, as well as park finder apps to find playgrounds in your area. There are also, of course, parenting forums. Additionally, there are library readings and crafting sessions that are free. The local YMCA is a great place too if you can afford a membership. Thankfully, they're not that expensive, but I also feel the isolation as a mom. I wish we lived in a more child-friendly world, and I think we can create that, but first we need to create not only legislative change, but interpersonal change. If you're an estranged parent, you need to apologize and change for the sake of your children and grandchildren. If you're a child-free adult who decided that a friendship was over because your friend had a kid, maybe look inward and be there for your friend. They're still the same friend, and they're desperate for help and to talk about things other than their kids. They want to talk to other adults, get to know their kid. What's the harm in that? We can have child-free events and spaces, but we cannot have a child-free world. Children deserve to be loved and have their lives witnessed by friends and family members and parents and grandparents, a village if you will. And if you are able to be that for someone, be a friend to a parent or to a child, you should take that opportunity. This is anecdotal, but I had a child-free 60-something-year-old library group leader who was also the reference librarian and YA specialist, if you will, at my local library growing up, and she was great. She loved Twilight, she was respectful and listened to us middle schoolers, and she made a difference in me and my friends' lives. And I just hope that tradition can continue, where child-free people and kids and parents can come together and be there for one another. Conclusion. In the end, the reason why most people don't have the villages they want is not only because of how capitalism forces us to work into our graves, forces us to see each other only as rivals, but also because grandparents and adults in general have a great disdain for children that we need to reckon with. Whether because they never wanted to be parents to begin with, or because they think they're annoying, it doesn't matter. Children are dehumanized by capitalism, and that needs to stop. Be there for your grandkids. Grow up. After I had a child almost 3 years ago, I had no experience, little to no family support. It was just me and my spouse, and I swore to myself if I ever had grandchildren, I would be there, and I'll stick to my word. I don't want to just be the most present parent. I want to be there for my grandchildren. And it's mind-boggling to me to think that so many grandparents are out there and just have no interest in being a grandparent. Even though I've estranged myself from my own family, I'm glad I did it because I know my worth and you do too. It may mean a smaller village, but it will be a healthier one. If you have children, you should surround them with people who love them, who want to witness their existence and growing up and validate them as little humans, and screw anyone who doesn't put in the work to continue your friendship or relationship post-child because they're not worth knowing. And if you're in a precarious position with a family member who isn't the best, but who you have to tolerate for childcare, know that I see you and that's okay too. We're not all privileged and we're not all able to just cut out someone even if they're abusive, and that's the sad reality. But know that there are resources available to you, and if you're in the New York City area and are facing homelessness due to your gender or sexual orientation, New Alternatives is here for you. Trans people are 10 times more likely to be homeless due to their gender identity and their families cutting ties with them because of it, and that's not right. It's not always the children that are cutting themselves off from the parents. Sometimes it's the family that cuts themselves off from the child. So that's it. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know what you think of this video down below. Were your parents, or grandparents I should say, present in your life? Are they present in your child's life if you have a child? Let me know down below, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.